Hey, welcome again to another episode of the Engineering Consultant Life. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Not too bad, Usen. Glad to be here talking. What are
Good.
we what are we going over tonight?
I guess we're just talking up today about the concept of self development.
All right. So what did you have in mind when you came up with that idea for a topic?
You
Why
know,
self-development?
like the the idea is like you never really stop learning. So even though at your job, there's people that been at a job for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. At that point you might, especially if you've been at the same you know position or doing something similar, you might kind of start feeling like you're not really learning anymore. You're Everything is just so pretty easy. So at that point, that's where I feel like the concept of self development is important, and not just only for like people who've been in the industry for a while, even people who are you know entry level, upcoming, mid level. You always want to keep your um technical ability and ideas and knowledge sharp and updated with whatever is going on in the industry at the time. So having that, personal self development and understanding what's going on, whether it's like through certifications and reading articles and your local um, and associations and stuff. That should be beneficial for individuals in the
All right,
workplace.
right. So both of us, right, are in engineering consultancy work. We're working in the construction materials testing and geotechnical engineering space, trying to help other companies or developers or contractors or designers or whoever it is figure out if the dirt they're putting on the ground is good, if they built their rebar and structural steel structures correctly, that sort of thing. So I happen to know that you have a you know insightful and simultaneously amusing kind of a background on why studying for certifications became important to you. So why, did you become kind of the master of studying for certifications and self-studying and self-developing in the course of your work? Because you weren't there for 15 years before you got bored. You were only working for a year and decided that you were going to put yourself through the paces and learn a bunch of stuff above and beyond a normal person's timeline.
Yeah, I think for me, it looks like why do we to answer your question, like why do we even take certs in the first place? I think number one really is like you're trying to secure your job and make sure like you're actually like having credentials that can actually make you valuable in the workplace. So I think that really was the number one thing, because it's like you're in this space and you want to make yourself valuable, not just to your employer really, but also to your clients. So but before your clients even get to value you, your employer would sees you first, right? So I think that was the number one reason, was to like increase my value. And having putting yourself like through all those rigorous like goals of like achieving whatever cert that you have in whatever timeline you give yourself, to me is like just a way of saying, okay, I'm gonna try to set myself apart from other peers by increasing my value in the workplace. And because at the end of the day, we all want to make money, to be honest. And one way to make money and also like further our career is by increasing our value. Another reason is really um, honing your knowledge and technical skills, and just being able to be a resource to other people. So having a knowledge of a certain code or something might give you the opportunity to able to like provide insight to other people who might not have that information. And again, that's a you're increasing your personal knowledge, and you're also increasing your value in the process. So I think for me, that was kind of like the overall two main points, was to like increase my value while um, um, gaining knowledge.
Now, all those things are important. And I believe all those things that you said. I believe you thought those things. but you also had another much kind of funnier gut check level kind of reason that you did it. All right, so are you willing to say it, or do I have to say it for you? Why did you self study certifications early in your career?
Well, uh, I
Besides
guess
all those awesome things that you just said.
I guess you could say it.
I can say it. Okay. So what you had told me that I thought was so just like cuttingly true was you said that you started studying, the construction code certification. So for everybody who's not kind of on board, what we're talking about is in our industry, a lot of the activities that we deal with, construction inspections and things of that sort. You're dealing with the International Building Code, and you get certified as a special inspector of soils or masonry or structural steel or welding through the International Code Council. So you read a bunch of textbooks, you take a big multiple choice test, and then you're certified as a soil special inspector. And now, if you do not have any other, relevant degrees or experience or something like that, you have to have those certifications to do the inspection work in the construction field.
Right.
Um, as long as the project that you're working on is governed by that code. But if you're an engineer, you can just kind of step in most states and do the inspections without having gone through those tests. Just having the engineering degree is good enough, and especially if you're licensed. But even just having, the bachelor's degree in engineering is sufficient. So what what you told me was after about a year of working in the field as an engineering consultant, doing special inspections and engineering inspections and all that fun stuff, you said, I was getting a bit bored of the day to day repetition, and I started self studying for certifications because I felt like just doing my job was making me stupid or making me feel stupid.
I
Like,
did
like,
say
I,
that.
like
Did I
you said it.
not?
You said pretty much something to that effect. You said you were afraid of getting dumb. And so you started picking up them books and reading and taking those tests
I
to keep
did.
yourself intellectually sharp. And it's, I completely understand not wanting to say that bluntly on a show like this, especially when you're trying to give advice and maybe inspire people to, get into this field or do this field. But there's, these kind of certain realities, and it's a really good reason to me to do it. It's a way to kind of engage yourself in the work and bring out the interesting parts. Because I think every job, no matter how cool it is or how exciting it seems on the packaging, after the initial couple days or weeks or months of learning the job and seeing some of the new stuff, and just about any job is going to have a ton of rote repetition. You become a doctor, and there's just going to be a lot of telling people to drink fluids and eat veggies. He's like, not every disease is, an episode
don't,
of
don't forget to
House.
wash your hands.
That's right. And in engineering, there's a lot of like, you're on a construction site and it's just another, job where you're out there and the contractor says like, "Hey, I got this wet dirt. Is that good?" No, it's really not good. The dirt needs to be drier. And that's like your whole day. You're literally out there taking samples of dirt, cooking the dirt, literally cooking the dirt on a camping stove to get the moisture content and calculate the density of the dirt and see if it was well compacted. And that is not necessarily stimulating. So if you use your break times or your kind of little bit of downtime at home or whatever to pick up a textbook and kind of teach yourself the wider context and get better at what you're doing, that can keep your mind active and can keep you kind of excited. Learning new things is exciting for all people, really. Not everybody has not everybody kind of acknowledges or knows the joys of learning because maybe they don't have a good pathway to it. But I think all humans are kind of wired to seek novelty, and learning new things by definition is novel. So that's kind of good for keeping you pepped up about what you're doing at work. So what do you
Right,
think about that?
right, right. I mean, you're absolutely right. Because one of the things I used to tell um, our new hires was when you, especially like if it's doing soils inspection, since that's what you mentioned in your statement there, soils inspections can be very it's wet. It needs to be dry. Very straightforward. But you run your test, you get data, you say, okay, this is what the data says, and then you tell the contractor, my data says this, and don't do that. And
It's
And
kind of a pre-built decision tree. There's not a whole lot of creativity in the day-to-day tasks for that, right?
right. And my
Or not
advice usually,
always.
yeah, and my advice usually was to is some if you keep doing stuff like that, and you don't really understand the data um that you're looking at, you're just pretty much just data in, data out without any understanding of it, and you're just like a robot at that point. So my advice usually is like, okay, what does the data say? How does this data affect the design? Kind of like just understanding like the little like fundamentals of stuff. And I feel like when you start doing the extra self development, reading books, code books, to kind of like learn those other things that you might not really be seeing on a day-to-day basis, and might be like just something maybe related to the concept, but a little bit something outside than what you deal with on a regular basis, and kind of like stimulate some thought process of like how things affect your job. It kind of gives you a wider understanding of like, okay, I can't, this number says this, but then I also have to take into effect on this other thing that the contractor is doing that's might be detrimental or might help, those kind of things, and start looking at the whole project from on a global perspective than just on one, what this is what that number says and this is what it means kind of thing. And so that's where I feel like having the concept of self development can be beneficial. And also, you're not going to be bored, because at that point, if you get to a point where you're running some moisture test or density or whatever, and you're starting like understanding the factors involved and things like that, it could be more mentally stimulating and more fun. Let me put it that way.
Yeah,
Compared to like a just like something that's just like, all right, blah, 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 like it could just seem more fun.
that's right. And I think there's kind of something that people do when they get into any line of work where they get in on their like first week, first month, and before they've even learned how to like tie their shoes correctly, they're already asking, what else can I learn? What's the next thing?
Right, right,
And you're like, dude, you haven't even like learned the name of the first thing that I hired you to do. So you need to do the first thing. And the person goes, well, the first thing doesn't seem that exciting. So like, what can I be learning kind of on the side, maybe? Or, they're kind of already looking for different, alternate pathways in
right.
case they don't like whatever they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might be beneficial sometimes when you're thinking about how do I grow myself, to not always just think about how do I branch out as fast as possible, but how do I actually, take root. And so if you're, again, in our industry, you're kind of stuck on some task like testing concrete day in and day out, going to concrete pours and making these, test samples of concrete. And it's just a lot of physical labor and watching people do the same thing over and over again, or you're testing soils, or, just anything that seems repetitive. And, you feel like maybe after the first month that you got it, right? You've seen enough of it. You've done it 10 times. You're like the best there's ever been. Nothing else to see here. But if you challenge yourself, it's like, how do I dig deeper into this? The minute that I get bored, I must be missing something, because you can almost imagine. I kind of like the idea that every minute thing in the world is potentially infinitely interesting. If you There's always like another layer to go, right? So you're doing concrete, and again, the work is repetitive, it's physical, it's maybe it doesn't always feel like, oh man, do I really need to have gone to school for this, or do I really need to have even taken a test for this? Can't anybody, with some arms do this? um but then you say, okay, well, maybe I'm going to go learn how concrete's made, right? And then figure out how that applies to what I'm seeing in the field. Because part of your job as an engineer or a special inspector on site is to try to figure out, is everything here as it should be? So you go read some book off on your own time about how concrete works and how concrete's made, and go watch YouTube videos, and go read the code books and everything else around it. Then you start noticing details that you never would have known before when you thought you were the king of the world already. You look at you look at the batch ticket from the concrete plant and you start realizing, oh, they've got these little fields on the ticket that tell me like the additives that are in the concrete. And now that I read that book on concrete, I know what each of those additives do, and I have some idea of how much there should be in there, and how adding a gallon of water to a truck of concrete can actually make some sort of difference to the whole thing. And if you can get your mind spinning on the details, then that can help keep everything engaging, and then that drives the value that you were talking about earlier. How do I make myself more valuable? By knowing more stuff about the minutia of what I'm doing, so that I can really be an expert and bring an expert's point of view to this task that really seemed simple and stupid on the surface, but it's actually really, really complex if you're doing your job right.
Yeah, another thing to think about is that our job, like, we're like the devil really is in the details, and we are like our attention to detail is very important in our job. So imagining if you end up getting bored at your job, then the whole concept of like while you're there to like watch certain activities, it could be potentially like dangerous for the project or whatever. If like you end up getting so bored that you kind of start like neglecting certain things, and that's why I think stimulating learning on yourself on your own, those things would be good. But then you said something that maybe we should need to dig into now, which is on your own time, like studying those
Mm-hmm.
things on your own time. And not everybody has the time after work, like 8 to 5, 9 to 4, to come back home and start saying, okay, I'm going to read the whole IBC or something,
The
or
International Building Code. Yeah.
yeah,
To give
yeah,
that explanatory comma. But yeah, so absolutely. So I think there's some, there's maybe a little bit of advice that could be had about time management and that sort of thing. If you really wanted to read a book, there are plenty of ways out there for you to carve out the extra 15 minutes a day to read the book, within the space of a month or something reasonable, right? You read, 15 minutes a day uninterrupted, early in the morning, late at night before you go to bed. There's some chunk of time in there that you got. So that's kind of, between you and your clock and your priority list. But I think the maybe what to me is the more interesting thing that comes from that question is the kind of stark reality that if you have a built-in expectation that stepping into a professional job of some sort automatically entitles you to advancement or grand opportunities or enriching experiences, I think you're kind of sadly mistaken, right? So, like, if just because, and you see it a lot with new people, and I definitely am guilty of it myself, having come into an industry where you say, okay, I've got, you know, an engineering degree or a master's degree or multiple degrees, and you kind of expect people to sort of, you know, just give you the world on a silver platter just because you did the thing that you thought you were supposed to do. You thought that was the end of it. I got the degree. I proved I'm the best thing ever. But I think the more realistic view is that the credential that you initially came out with got you in the door, and now you have to decide, is kind of like that thing that everybody has to deal with of, do I have a job or do I have a career, right? And how important is that thing to me? If I just want to have a paycheck and go home and spend time with my family, or have time to go work out at my leisure or do a bunch of hobbies or activities, those are all perfectly legitimate things to want to do. But given finite time resources, yet you have to see that there's a trade off, there's a cost. So if you're looking at your career and saying, hey, man, why am I not getting promoted to manager? Well, if you're only coming in at 8 and clocking out at 5 and never offering to do anything extra, never cracking open a book in your free time, well, that's what you get. You get just the standard paycheck with the standard 2 to 3% raise a year, and that's it. So hopefully you're really enjoying your free time. But I think if you want to become a professional in kind of the deeper sense of the word, of somebody who has some sort of mastery over their job and who is doing something important and is carrying responsibility on their shoulders, then you have to take it upon yourself to make sacrifices to get there. So what's your thought
yeah.
there?
I feel like those are valid points. The sacrifices, yes, you're actually absolutely right. The I guess the argument I would make is like nowadays there's a huge um um fight for like the work life balance. So
Mm-hmm.
how am I supposed to have a work life balance? And then you're telling me that during my free time, which is supposed to be like enabling my work life balance, I'm supposed to be like reading all these books and developing myself because if I want to have, yes, I want to have a good career, but then I also want to have like a work life balance. So it's like how is an individual supposed to like am I just supposed to be like okay forget my work life balance just because I want to be a master of this like that's that's where things can start getting like a little bit confusing now.
Confusing, or maybe upsetting is the better word, because you have to kind of face a realization, right? So then this is where you kind of get into this idea of utopia, right? So I think most everybody is familiar with the basic word, utopia, just kind of like this fantasy perfect place. But the kind of roots of that word, right? It's a coined word. Um, and I'm going to forget the author's name, so I won't try to struggle with it. But there's a guy who wrote a book called Utopia who coined that word, and it was a play on words. So the word utopia was a play on the Greek words for, what was it? So topos meaning place, you meaning good. So a good place. But then there's also kind of like a, I guess you'd call it a homonym word that sounds similar. Um, utopia can also mean no place. So utopia, to the author's mind, I want to say Samuel Beckett, was utopia is a good place that is no place. It is a place where all things are perfect and all things are as good as they could possibly be imagined, and they're all good all the time at the same time. And so that's a thing that would be awesome, but it's impossible. It's a good place that is no place. So if your utopia is, oh, I have an awesome career where I'm a high powered professional or executive or whatever the thing is, businessman, you're trying to make a bunch of money, whatever. I'm rich and I'm respected and I have a high position of power and responsibility, and I have enough time to spend with my kids, and I have enough time to work out, and I have a perfect diet, and I get 3 weeks of awesome vacation a year. That's too much stuff. It doesn't all fit in a year. You know, even the people that you perceive, in pop culture or in media or something, who seem to have that image of having that, very likely they don't. There's some sort of trade-off happening there. You don't have that level of success in your career and get to have 12 hours on a Saturday, every Saturday, with your kids or with your hobbies or something like that. There's got to be a trade off. You have to make a choice somewhere.
I feel like there has to be a way where people could still be successful in their career and have some sort of balance.
And then,
Maybe
and it just depends on how you
and
define
it might
success,
just be
right?
like a sliding yeah, it might be a sliding scale and also depend what you define success as.
So
But
if you want to have a really enriching personal life, with that takes a lot of time. You want to have like three hobbies and kids and whatever other things you're spending your time on and a vacation, then your level of success that you expect for yourself maybe has to be different. And I don't even want to say lower as if it's lesser, but you maybe have to expect less progression in your career as a trade-off for having more stuff in your free time. So work life balance means that you're doing a optimization activity and not a minimax activity, right? So if I'm trying to maximize my career, I have to work 80 hours a week, and I will struggle to maintain relationships and outside activities and my health. If I want to optimize my career and my work life, that inherently means a balance, right? Just like any other optimization problem. So we're engineers, right? So I can say, I want to have an engine that has maximum efficiency and gives me maximum power. But then you actually go and do the math and you realize, oh, whoops, there's actually a direct trade off between those two. As I maximize or as I increase efficiency or like fuel usage, I have to get rid of power. I have to take some away to get some to the other. It's a what do you call it? It's a, oh, what's the word? Um,
it's
it,
kind of like how when you
it's a
just
fixed basket.
yeah.
There's not infinite resource there, so I have to balance instead of getting the most out of something. And if I want to have the best possible personal life, where I get to spend all of my time with my loved ones and do fun things, then you might have a pretty remedial job that you just show up, leave, and get paid $12 an hour. And that's it. You've maximized your personal life and you've taken that away from your work life. And you
Yeah,
can't get around it really
yeah,
without
okay,
having like a Harry Potter time turner.
yeah, because the reason why I bring this up is because in order for you to to get this, do this self development, especially if you know it's not always, most of these self development stuff that I guess that we're talking about, they might not necessarily be like company sponsored per
Mm-hmm.
se. So it's stuff that you're doing on your own time and might not be on company time because of, especially as a consultant, we're always worried about billable hours. So
Yeah.
if we're doing all these stuff and it's not billable, it might not really be pleasing to our managers. And I bring this up because we how is one coming into the industry and realizing that, okay, I need to be mentally stimulated or keep learning so I don't get dumb, and decide that, okay, I will master this concept or master this topic or something, or or get
Yeah.
certified in
Gain this
this.
piece of knowledge, get this.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
how does one do that, and without like making like personal sacrifices or anything? From what you're saying, like those sacrifices have to be made.
Or
And
let's say your question is maybe without making too much of a personal sacrifice.
yeah,
Would
because
that be fair?
think about it, if you're just like a fresh graduate from undergrad, and you're getting into a program, no, like you're getting into the industry and you're working, think about it, you had 4 to 5 years of
Mm.
writing, of reading books, reading textbooks, quizzes, tests and all. And then imagine if you had like a master's program right after on top of that. And then now you're in the industry and you're working, and you're telling me that while I'm working, that's not the end of it, that I still need to keep up on self-development. All I want to do is play video games every day at this point.
Yeah. So
Or
my gut response to that is if you got to spend 5 years reading books and learning, then you are automatically one of the most privileged people that has ever existed on the planet and in human history. So you should have some gratitude for having had the privilege of spending 5 years reading books under the guidance of some of the most intelligent and accomplished people on the planet. Given that, so you got through college, you're a bit burnt out. You were hoping to be able to cut loose a little bit once you got into your work life, turn it off for a little bit. And that's fair. So it's like, okay, you don't want to just maybe throw yourself into the fire again unless you have the high ambition that really, most of these kind of things in the population are on a bit of a normal distribution. So there's some tiny chunk on the high end of the distribution of just crazy people that want to be like the king of the world, and they're going to just throw themselves immediately into the fire, and that's what they're going to do. But if you're somewhere in the first standard deviation of people who want to have that balance, then yeah, you have to figure out what is the most that you can do that you're willing to do, right? So all of us can do a lot more in any arena of life than we do. I can exercise more, I can eat more vegetables, I can, you know, whatever. You can always do a little bit more, but there's always trade-offs. So and then you got to start thinking about something like the 80-20 rule, that kind of what is the smallest activity that I can do that I'm actually willing to make myself do that has the biggest payoff, right? So if we go back to our concrete example of, okay, so I'm doing all these concrete pours at my job. I'm the inspector on site. I'm making the test specimens. I'm getting a little bit tired of it or fed up with it. Then you got to think, okay, what is the least thing that I could do to make this interesting and make myself more valuable? So then you think, okay, maybe I'll go figure out like what is the little bit of technical knowledge that I could read in 5 minutes that would make me useful and maybe impress my boss. So you're maybe getting into the winter at your job, and then your boss sends out an email to the whole company reminding everybody that we really need to pay attention to the building code section on cold weather concrete because the weather affects the quality of concrete if it's not placed correctly. So you say, okay, I'm going to spend 20 minutes reading the cold weather concrete paragraph in detail and memorizing the key points. And then I'm going to go to my next job site and I'm going to make a point of talking about those rules and those codes to somebody on the site. So I'm just going to go up and say, "Hey, what is this company going to do to, maintain the temperature on the concrete to make sure it, stays above the threshold in the code?" All right, you just go and ask the question. So you bothered to read a paragraph. It took 10 minutes out of your day. Then you made a point to go and apply it on site. Just say it out loud so it sticks in your head, and maybe somebody looks at you and goes, "Wow, this guy's trying hard. He's asking the right questions." No, none of these other inspectors show up and ask the questions. They just stare at us and make the samples and look at their phones. And that's automatically a huge boon. And then you go to your boss after the concrete, job happens and you say, "Oh man, I noticed that they were using this material to cover the concrete instead of this other material I'd seen before. Why did they do that? Which one's better?" You start asking your boss some questions. All you had to do was read a paragraph, and now you have all this material in your head that you can go have a conversation with your boss. And you'll find most bosses are very excited when young people come up and ask them technical questions and want to get involved in the discussion about what they do. They want to share the knowledge. They want to, you know, develop somebody that's showing interest. So the payoff was you read 10 sentences and now all of a sudden your boss thinks that you're super sharp and trying hard and you actually are doing your job better, and it didn't take all that much. So it's good bang for your buck.
So I guess the next question I would ask is, how does one get motivated? Because it's one thing to understand that, okay, this is what you need to do, but
Mm-hmm.
it's another thing to like actually get the momentum to say, all right, every Friday I'm gonna like sit down between this time and like take this in, or I'm actually going to go and take get certified in this, and I'm actually going to commit and do it. Like you actually, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it comes down to the individual to make the commitment. So like, what are the kind of things that individuals can use? I mean, obviously, like those goals or looking forward to something like might be a method of saying, okay, if I get this, this might happen as a reward in the future, and that might be a good reason or a good method of how, kind of like how to reason that to yourself as to why you should take it seriously to invest in yourself, because essentially that's what you're doing. You're investing in yourself by doing the self development and certifications and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of interesting directions you can go with that, right? So something that comes to mind first off, um, and I'm definitely borrowing these ideas from smarter people. There's a benefit of just listening to a lot of different interviews with different people that are experts in different fields, um, where you take this kind of psychological notion where I guess they have these studies that kind of show that people on average tend to be, m- let's say, more averse to negative outcomes than they are attracted to positive outcomes. So, like, you might be more upset by the idea of losing $10 than you would be excited by the prospect of earning $20, right? We really don't like to experience negative things as people. It's a big driver. So, what you might want to do is say, okay, here's my two options. I am working this job that, again, is relevant to my industry, but it's entry level, or relevant to my education, rather. But it's entry level. There's some boring parts to it. I'm getting a bit tired. So, what I want you to imagine now is you take the worst aspects of your job, the ones that really drive you the craziest, that get you the most kind of down and feeling negative for having to do them over and over. And then you think, how will I feel if I have to keep doing this same thing for 5 more years before I get my first promotion? And if that's not enough to make you go, okay, I can read 1 page out of the code book a day. I can take a practice test a day for that certification. I can even just go sign up for an account on the certification website where you sign up for the tests. So you think about the worst possible outcome for yourself and really sit with it. It's not just enough to say like, "Oh man, it would be not so fun to have to do this for a long time." Really sit down for like a good, 3 minutes of uninterrupted thought, of just visualizing doing the same thing you don't like for 5 more years. Really let it sink in. And then say, what is the smallest thing I can do today now that I have this kind of energy, this kind of fear of that outcome, and do it really fast while you're still thinking that, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's where the distinction between a job and a career comes in, because some people might look at that and okay, I'm going to be doing this for the next 5 years, the same thing, and they might be okay with it, because um to them it might just be a job and they have any something else in life that's more important than
Well,
that.
yeah, because
Yeah.
if you're again, because it's all about what is your goal. So if your goal is to have lots of time with your new toddler that you just had or something, then you might want an easy, repetitive job that you don't have to put too much extra time into, so that you can do the thing you want outside of work, and that's great. So you might, if you sit down and say, "What would I do if I did this same job in 5 years?" And if your gut response is, "Hey, that'd be pretty nice. That means I wouldn't have to be too stressed out. I like that future." Then good. Keep doing what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with it. Jobs are good. Feeding yourself is good. Feeding your family is good. But it's if you visualize that and you have a negative response, then you need to avoid the negative response. You got to do the right thing for yourself by going to the next level, then, because that that's automatically telling you that you want something more. And it's good to want something more in some aspect of your life. And if it happens to be work, then you got to do the things necessary to go get that. So, like I said, it's just figuring out what that thing is. And it could be, hey, man, if you're not a big reader, not everybody likes to sit down and crack open a textbook. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So it could just be that you invite your project manager or some other, you know, smart, salty engineer at your office out for drinks every Friday and just pepper them with questions and get, stories from every crazy job they've ever been on, and what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen, and what do you do when a contractor does this crazy thing. You just start having those conversations. So you got to find some avenue, some outlet that's acceptable to you, or maybe that's even fun for you, to start learning about your job and getting better at your job. So you can get creative with it.
Yeah, and then so far up to this point, we've kind of like talked about self development from the perspective of the employee.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can explore it even deeper and talk about it from the perspective of the employer and what employers can do to kind of like motivate or facilitate like their employees' self development. Because uh, if you start doing like the concrete examples that you gave, it was pretty much the individual's decision to say, okay, I want to make myself more knowledgeable about concrete and cold weather and things like that. So what can employers, especially in our industry, what can employers do to kind of like motivate employees where their job doesn't seem that, basically making sure like their job seems very important, and they
Mm-hmm.
they they consider that the self development that's being like that they're being shown to participate in
Yeah,
is
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like
So it's
is
kind of
kind
like,
of
how do
like
you get somebody excited? How do you get
yeah,
somebody
yeah,
engaged? And how do you make sure they're learning the stuff they need to learn?
because
Um,
that's going to tell on the production of how they do their job as well.
yeah. And then that affects your bottom line. So it's all beneficial to all parties. So, obviously the thing I think everybody snaps to, and I'm kind of learning that it's perhaps people snap to it too quickly, is you assume that the only way to train people is through like formal sessions and courses and certifications and seminars and these kind of high production value activities.
Mm-hmm.
And having just barely dipped my toe into the arena of trying to either develop these programs or run these programs, or even just you realize that there's some difficulties there. Like it takes a bit of a monumental effort to get your hands on material or develop material, and then to carve out the time when you can actually take your employees out of the field, out of what they're doing day to day to make the company money, and sit them down and run a class. And it's not even always just because, oh, the company doesn't want to spend the money. Sometimes it's just literally we don't see the spot on the calendar when all these people can get in a room at the same time because they're far flung doing different things, especially if you're in an industry where you're traveling or going to sites or very dependent on or beholden to the client schedules.
Hmm.
And I think the formal training classes are vital, and you have to find some sort of way to get it done on some level. And there's a lot of cool tools out there for that now. We have these all these online tools and remote meetings and everything else that can make the whole thing bit less painful. But then I think it becomes interesting of on a day-to-day level, how do you go about, just sort of nudging employees and tweaking employees and sort of guiding their behavior into sort of a kind of a culture of everybody wanting to develop and learn. So I kind of think like if I've got some workers under me doing some sort of, tasks, working on projects for me or doing this, that, or the other thing, I could just take the approach of here's your task, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is what I expect. Go do it. Tell me when you're done. Right. So that's the sort of job environment where someone says, okay, I'm not engaged. I'm not going to go out of my way to learn as long as I give this guy what he asked. I'm supposed to get my money and I'll get my 3% raise. And then after a couple of years, I'll complain and maybe get a bigger raise. All right. So that's the kind of environment that you create with that sort of management. Um, but then what I think you can start doing is you can start just again on day to day conversations. You can start sort of trying to spark a bit of curiosity because again, I think everybody has a capacity to learn and a kind of deep desire to learn, but sometimes it's latent because you do spend so much time doing rote things in life that you literally just kind of cram down that sort of childlike desire to learn. So then if your employees are coming in from the field and you can start asking them little challenge questions. So, how did this thing go in the field? Did the contractor do this or did you notice this detail or what's the answer to this weird little question that I know that you didn't think of today, And you start trying to get them in a mindset of, oh, there's like a lot of stuff I don't know. And you're not doing it in a way where you're beating their ignorance into their heads, right? Like, why don't you know this, you lazy employee? Why are you so ignorant? But it's a little more like just showing them little potential pathways of, oh, did you know that this technology exists, or do you know why we do that particular method? And the obvious answer is, well, no, you just told me to go do it. So then hopefully just posing the question and having those little conversations might inspire them to go figure out why so that they if you're a halfway decent person to work for, uh, generally your employees will want to get approval from you in some way. So if you set up a situation where you get approval by knowing a bunch of stuff about what your job entails, well, that might inspire some self learning on the side, if that makes sense.
I think from what you said, the key point that can be taken is culture, like creating like that culture to want to make your employees dive into like self development, where it's a culture where some other guy is looking at you like, hey, why haven't you self developed today? Like I self developed 3 times last week. you know,
Yeah, and that's what's
uh,
so
yeah.
interesting because when you go into some of these companies, there's kind of this built-in culture where everybody's a bit cynical, and I don't know if it's something that's just kind of in the air in the zeitgeist. It's just like you got maybe too many people that are a bit too cool for school, so to speak, and you're kind of like, it's like the positive conversation is like, yeah, man, we're engineers, we don't need those dumb ICC certs. That's just for the people that didn't get degrees like us. And what you really want is to create a culture where people realize that the certifications or the learning or having the knowledge and curiosity is a desirable trait. And then I think all it takes is to get kind of a critical threshold of people that you've sort of got into that more positive mindset of, oh, I'm proud of myself for having spent some time reading and knowing the answers to things and being able to talk to clients about technical issues in a more competent manner. And then the employees maybe start talking amongst themselves. And instead of saying, oh, can you believe that the boss wants us to work on this certification? The conversation might turn into, hey, what certification are you working on this month?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you get enough people asking each other those questions after, getting some of your let's say getting some of your minions tuned onto the right frequency, I think that could snowball pretty quickly and do, really good things for whatever organization that you're in.
Yeah, you mentioned something briefly. I think maybe it might be interesting to just talk about briefly. We've talked about this before, and ICC, if anyone doesn't know, is the International Code Council. And the statement that you made was like engineers saying that they're engineers and they have the engineering degrees or their, engineering training, and they don't require or they don't need to get the ICC certifications because obviously they can perform those tasks according to like the International Building Code that allows them to. So I guess the question is like that we usually get, and well, we've talked about this to some degree before, is why if I am not required to get those certs, how important is it, especially for like special inspection in this case? Like why is it important that I get those certs for um for my job when I'm allowed to do the inspections? So I think all the things that we've talked about up to this point as to like you because the individual might not be bored. They might be somewhat competent in what they're doing, and they
And they
just
might like it,
they
but they
might
just don't
like it,
see why
but
should
they
I go
just
study? Why do I
yeah
need to spend time? I'm good at my
yeah
job already.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like in that situation, like what would you say to someone like that? Because they don't have at that point if they've been doing it for a while and they're competent and their employer also isn't making them because of by code they're also allowed to do those functions. Like what's the detriment of taking it versus like not taking it?
Yeah, so I think that's a good place for maybe a cliched statement where you do not know what you do not know, right? So if nothing else, if you think that you're competent, go ahead and assume that there is bound to be somebody else in the world that's like an order of magnitude more competent than you. If you're a 25-year-old special inspector or engineer in training, or even a PE, you're 25 and you did everything just perfectly and got your licensure when you were like 24, you're killing it, or whatever the earliest age that you can get it is. Um, there's always that guy who's been working for 10 years more than you, 15, 20, 40 more years than you. And there's exponential growth in knowledge that happens over that time. So it's a bit of arrogance to think that there's nothing else left to learn. And I think let's see, how do I want to say this? Um, there's benefits that get realized from diving into the details that you don't know until you see it. So, if I take an example, we've been talking a lot about special inspections, but I actually spend most of my time doing geotechnical engineering work, soil explorations, figuring out the engineering properties of soils so that somebody can design a building's foundations properly on top of it. So, for the better part of 5 years, I've been writing these geotechnical reports over and over again, very similar projects, very similar, language in the reports. So there's a section where we talk about what's the local geologic conditions at the site. And it's one of those things where most geotechnical engineers, maybe when you were in college, you were made to take some sort of, geology 101 or an earth science so that you get introduced to, what are rocks and how are rocks formed and how is the soil formed from those rocks and, blah, blah, blah. The really basic stuff, just enough to really make you dangerous. And, we'd have these little sections of, okay, we're here in Atlanta, so we're in the Piedmont region, and you're, sitting on ancient mountains that have turned into leftover soils after the rock decays. And that's all nice. Yeah, it's 3 paragraphs and then you move on with the report. It's very cookie cutter if you let it be. So just in the past couple months, I got curious and I said, what is really up with this geology stuff that's in my reports that I've been writing for 5 years? Went and bought myself some books on what's going on in the local geology, and I spent a lot of time, you know, days or weeks reading these books and going into details, and some of it is just not relevant to the day to day nitty gritty of what I do, but a lot of it was eye opening. You start reading about terms that you hear older folks in the industry toss around, these residual soils, saprolites, expansive clays, kaolinite, and da 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 da. and you start connecting dots. You start going, oh, it is kind of important to know what the geologic history of different parts of the state are, so that when I go to a job site in that part of the state, I know what the soil conditions are. I can predict them. It's not just good enough to know, like, oh, South Georgia is kind of sandy. What you really need to know is South Georgia was formed from a bunch of sand and clay sloughing off of the Appalachians and getting dumped in a pile, in an ancient ocean, and piling up and making a new landmass. That kind of tells you a lot about what you expect to see underground, and that affects how you build a building and keep it from falling down. Um, so finding some little detail that sparks a curiosity and pursuing that curiosity makes you better at your job in ways that you don't quite know until you do it and realize the benefits. And some stuff that you go and read about and learn, you might never get to use a lot. Maybe it's just stuff, conversation material for cocktail parties at professional events, and maybe that's all you get out of it. But some stuff can really have exponential dividends and unlock doors to your understanding and really make you that much more competent. So it's worth it. And again, it's an 80-20 thing. What's the 20% of stuff that I can go and read or watch or talk about and get 80% of the benefit of having this new knowledge and having this new expertise. So that was a
Great.
bit of a mouthful, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you don't really. You're right. You don't know until you don't know. And I mean, I've seen situations where you 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 might think that you're competent in certain in something, but then because of maybe someone else got like the whole situation, like how you read the book, you might actually found out like you're actually more technically savvy with the information compared to someone who might have just been on a day to day, just doing being exposed to like a situation, but not really understanding the technical concepts behind it. So you find out that you're actually a little bit, not even a little bit, probably much more dangerous in terms of like communicating technically than the other person. So when issues arrive, you actually have the capacity to actually like solve those issues comfortably, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we should strive for self-development, is to kind of like you're putting weapons in your little arsenal of gaining, so that when situations arrive, you can just go boom, 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 like you kind of have resources of knowing where to find information or having the information in your head, you know so which
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think this was a good discussion that we had today. Do you have any closing comments before we round up and call it a day?
Well, I think it's always just good to summarize. So I guess the gist is, you know, what is self development? Why should I do it? How do I do it? Right. So, this idea of self development is I basically want to, if I'm somebody who's career oriented and wants to be, competent and respected and have progression in my job, then I need to work on myself. I need to build up my skill set. I need to build up my knowledge base. Why should you do it? For the reason stated. If you want to be a more well rounded person, a more well rounded professional, have more opportunities and more abilities to do novel things, then you have to go and put in effort. You have to spend some capital, some self capital. And then you can't just rely on your company to do it. Some companies have great built in programs that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to establish. Most companies that you go to probably don't. Those are the lucky folks who go to a place that have an internal, university of here's how we do our job awesomely. Most companies, you just show up and you get some work to do, and to a large degree, you're on your own, even with good intentions. So you have to figure out what is your program that you're going to put yourself through. What is your level of effort you're willing to put into it, and then have the discipline to do it, and then reap the rewards that inevitably come anytime you invest in yourself, even if it's not obvious how it's going to manifest itself at first. So I think that pretty well sums up what I took from our conversation.
Yep, yep, yep. Good, 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 good. Well, thanks for listening to the episode today. Hope you guys liked it, and we'll see you guys in the next one.